swear in it. Would you mind raising both hands, please?
All right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you, Swanky?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You may proceed.
Your Honor, can I proceed up?
Yes.
Alright, hello, Mr. Cole. How's your day going so far?
It's been rather, phenomenal, I won't lie to you.
Alright, so I'm going to start from the top of the perspective upon arriving on scene. So, what exactly did Miss Brooks inform you upon arriving on scene?
Well, I was informed that Miss Brooks's company, Shanley, had been shot by a Mr. Brett Jackson over there before Brett Jackson had fled the scene.
Mr. Britt right there?
Yes, that man right there.
Sounds good, sounds good. Okay, so, who do you recall seeing on scene?
Well, as far as I recall, memorable people on scene other than my fellow officers were Shanley on the ground. Brooke was still on the scene, and apparently Brett had ran off from the scene. Other than that, there was, a couple of eyewitnesses, I believe.
Was there blood spilling on the scene?
Yes.
And you guys happened to test that DNA?
I believe that would be for the forensics expert.
Okay, and Mr. Cole, just to be clear, you informed Miss Brooks that you would bring justice to the death of her loved one.
Well, in, the small town of Grande Parish that we reside in, where this incident took place, I am the lead homicide investigator, and I do look to seek justice for anybody who has been done wrong inside of my small hometown.
Alright, so today I asked that the judge can see this situation and can bring justice to Miss Brooks. Upon further investigation, I confirmed that the trajectory of the bullet was consistent.
Zeno, that's his testimony.
Okay, sounds good. I'll scratch that out. So yeah, I would hope that the judge and the jury bring justice and peace to Mrs. Brooks today.
Thank you, Counselor.
I'm sorry, but this isn't closing statements. This is supposed to be questioning
No,
a
it's not
witness.
closing statements. I get it. I understand. We're just, yeah. Counselor, this is not closing arguments. We're just asking questions to the witness.
Alright, well, I have no more questions.
I do.
Thank you. Alright.
Officer, on page 23, could you please read the first sentence of your testimony there?
Upon further investigation, I confirmed that the trajectory of the bullet was consistent with someone shooting it from their waist area, or at minimum, below the belt of the shooter.
At this time, I would like to submit Exhibit F. F1
Okay.
and F2 in evidence.
Members of the jury.
48 and 49.
Yeah, 48 and 49.
Alright, officer, can you please explain Exhibit F1?
Exhibit F1 is where the bullet made entry in the front of Shanley's body, and then the exit wound up right below the neckline of his back.
Thank you, and would you please explain Exhibit F2?
Exhibit F2 would be the trajectory at which the bullet would have had to been fired for it to make such an entry
Hey,
and exit wound on
Nard
Shanley's
is
body.
asking me to come help with a shootout. We don't have
And
a lot of
based
cops in the city
on
right now,
previous
and
testimony
they need bodies
of
right now.
Miss
So,
Brooke on how far apart the
can you hear me?
suspect and Shan were apart, which
Mr. Man,
we have said
Sheeny.
is arm length apart. You agree?
Is there? Is there?
I don't know if you heard.
Could you
me,
restate the question?
We kind of have a
Do you agree that
little shootout going on right
Mr.
now,
Jackson
and
and
I need
Mr.
to
Shanley
respond
were
to it.
arm lengths apart at
Okay,
the
here we
time
go.
of the shooting?
So door, just keep this door
I
locked.
cannot confidently
Okay.
confirm that
Recommend.
statement.
Based on
Yeah, and I will
Okay.
be back shortly, hopefully.
Okay,
okay,
yeah,
based on
yeah,
the
I'll keep the door locked.
trajectory.
Okay.
Just pay me.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, pay me when I get back.
Based on the trajectory of the bullet, if each of these two men were standing with their arms held to each other, I can confirm that.
So, and based on the trajectory, in order for a bullet to hit Mr. Shan in the chest at that angle, could it have been fired from that far on the ground? Or would it have to have been waist or just below the waist?
It would have had to have been below the waist.
But not from the ground, so somewhere between the knee and the waist?
Perhaps, yes.
Alright, and based on the statements that you took from all the witnesses, right after Mr. Shan was shot, what did the suspect do?
According to the first witness, which I interviewed as the owner, Bob of Big Bob's Burgers, he claims that Brett Jackson left the establishment slightly disgruntled. He seemed like he was in a hurry. And moments later, after he left, there was a gunshot heard, and he had instructed his staff to call 911 and that no one should go outside in fear that the gunman was still at large.
Because as soon as the shot was fired, Brett left the scene, correct?
That would be correct. He did flee the scene.
Now, did you find any weapons of any kind on Mr. Shanley?
Mr. Shanley was unarmed.
So it's correct that this man was shot, unarmed, posing no sort of threat to the defendant.
That would be correct.
And were you able to conclude that the gun did in fact belong to Brett Jackson?
That is correct.
And did you find any witness statements or any reason to believe that the gun was fired upon striking the ground instead of being shot fired.
We had no witnesses to comply with the story that we heard from a Mr. Brett Jackson that the firearm hit the ground and then hit Shanley upon hitting the ground.
Did you find proof on Brett that a gun was fired? Well, maybe not. Okay, that a gun was discharged in his general vicinity.
We did indeed find gunshot residue on Mr. Brett Jackson. He tested positive for gunshot residue.
Generally speaking, in order to get gunshot residue on your clothes, wouldn't you have had to fire said gun?
Objection, hearsay. Also beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Okay, so you found gunshot residue on the suspect.
Yes, it was on his clothing.
Alright, after you gathered evidence, did you in fact arrest the suspect?
Yes, after gathering a substantial amount of evidence and confirming that we had no witnesses that could advocate for Mr. Brett Jackson's story, we did indeed charge him with second-degree murder and held him in our local prison.
And do you have any reasonable suspicion that he acted in self-defense?
Based on the evidence provided and the lack of witnesses that can confirm that he acted in self-defense, I have no reasonable doubt that this man did not act in self-defense.
Your Honor, we're going to rest at this time, but I do retain the ability to question him further.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh,
Mr. Cross?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Cole.
Good.
Did you say that you pride yourself on the fact that, I believe it was 90% of your cases end up in you being correct with the arrest?
I would say that I'm prideful in the fact that I can do my job to such a degree where I can convict 90% of the people I find, and charge.
Would you say that you work extra hard to make sure that every time you arrest someone, that you make sure that they're convicted?
I would say that I work extra hard to convict the people that do crime, yes.
The first person that you spoke to when you arrived on the scene was Brooke Jackson, is that correct?
That would be correct.
You would agree that she was close to the victim?
Oh, it would seem so. She seemed rather distraught at the fact that, her friend or whatever, colleague, business, partner, co-worker was, dead on the ground, yes.
And when you began questioning Miss Jackson, she stated to you that Mr. Jackson was the one that shot Mr. Lee, is that correct?
That would be correct.
But then later on, she told you that she closed her eyes, correct?
That would be correct.
On page 22, your testimony, you said that Miss Jackson told you it happened so quickly and Brooke could not be sure when exactly they closed their eyes, whether right before or immediately after the gun was fired. Brooke stated that they had never been so close to a gun before and the sound alone caused them to be disoriented coupled with the fear of having a gun pointed in your direction, correct?
That would be correct.
Would you agree that upon her own testimony to you that she didn't see exactly who shot Mr. Lee?
I believe, according to her testimony, that she saw someone draw a gun and point it in their direction, but did not see them pull the trigger.
You agree that the trajectory of the bullet was at the waist or minimum below the belt line, correct?
That is correct.
Would you characterize below the belt line as being the ground?
Well, I mean, of course the ground is, below the belt. It would be down
Thank
actually
you.
below the ankle.
That wasn't my question, Mr. Cole. Below the belt line is the ground. Do you agree that it would be difficult to fire a gun from your waist?
Oh, yes, without a doubt.
So, and you agree with the expert, Kennedy Gill, that the trajectory of the bullet is consistent with it being below the waistline and on the ground shooting in an upwards direction, correct?
That would be correct.
You also agree with the assessment that the gun was faulty, is that correct?
Objection. Nowhere in his testimony does he state that it's on the ground. It says from their waist area or at minimum below the belt line. Nowhere does it state the ground.
He already
It's a
agreed, so.
Yeah, he did agree.
That it was
That's
below
sustained.
the belt, yes.
But you agree with Kennedy Gill's, Ken Gill's assessment that the gun was faulty.
Yes, the gun, we did find that the gun had some slight issues with it, yes.
The trigger specifically would have been very, very easy to set off, right?
Yes, it was a very hair-like trigger.
If it smacked the ground, that trigger could have been set off, correct?
Depending on where it was dropped, yes.
Would you also agree with Mr. Gill's assessment that there is a spot on the butt of the gun where it could have hit the ground?
The gun had multiple scratches and different spots on it, possibly having hit the ground at some point, yes.
I'd like to direct everyone to page 25. I have reviewed the report from the defense's expert, Kennedy Hill, and I do agree that this particular firearm has inconsistencies that are not found in most handguns, specifically the hair-like trigger that could possibly misfire from it being dropped from a high distance. That's your testimony, right?
Yes.
And you already agreed with me that it'd be difficult for somebody to fire their gun in an upwards direction from below their waistline.
Yes.
That's my case with you.
All right. Well, looks like our jury's doing really good over there.
Yeah, it looks like her jury's thinned out.
Yeah. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mr. Was that Mr. Cole? Officer Cole?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Actually,
sir.
I would like to.
Counter. Okay.
Mr. Cole, could you please read your testimony on page 23, the first paragraph?
Upon further investigation, I confirmed that the trajectory of the bullet was consistent with someone shooting it from their waist area, or at minimum below the belt line of the shooter. This is consistent with Brooke's testimony that Brett pulled the gun from a side holster. Brooke was not able to provide any other information regarding the incident. I have included Exhibit F1 and 2, which illustrates the trajectory of the bullet and the entry and exit wounds of the bullet as well. These illustrations are consistent with the findings and investigation I conducted. The methods I used to determine this information is standard protocol in my field of homicide investigation.
Could you please clarify what you meant by, at minimum, below the belt line of the shooter?
On the average male of average height, below the belt line would be considered underneath the stomach where, tie your belt.
So were you meaning directly below that belt line, or were you intending anywhere between the belt line and the floor?
Directly below the belt line. It would have been either at their waist area or their belt line, anywhere between their minimum.
So if I'm correct, the shot would have had to come from somewhere between the waist and the knee.
That would be correct.
No further questions at this time.
Okay.
I'd like to rebut if I can. Am I allowed?
Did you one? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Cole, you're aware of Miss Jackson's testimony that Mr. Lee came up and smacked the gun out of Mr. Jackson's hand?
Can you repeat?
You're aware of Miss Jackson's testimony that Mr. Lee went up to Mr. Jackson and smacked the gun out of his hand, correct?
Objection, she said.
Tried
attempted.
to.
Yes, I'm aware that he attempted to disarm Mr. Jackson.
Hold on. Don't proceed without ruling yet. What was your objection? I'm sorry.
That she didn't say that she said he attempted, not that he succeeded.
Did attempted to smack the gun out of Mr. Jackson's hand, correct?
That would be correct.
Would you agree, considering your prior agreement with Mr. Gill's expert assessment of the trigger being faulty and very sensitive, that if someone smacked it, it could cause the gun to go off?
I could not confidently say that, as Mr. Lee's assessment was that if the gun were to hit the ground hard enough, it might go off.
You would agree that it was a feather-like trigger that was very sensitive and could easily have been set off.
That would be correct.
Thank you.
All right. Does the state have any other cross or rebuttals?
You good, Arlie?
Not at this time.
Okay. Officer Cole, you may step down. Thank you so much for your testimony.